Well, now we're going to have a look at some of the street upgrades and the issues that have dominated news in the last year or two, and namely Fitzroy, Ackland and Carlisle streets. But before we have a discussion about that, we're going to have a look at a report on the issue by having a look at this tape.
But at the moment we are in a consultation process, and we're here to listen to the community to see what people like about it, what people don't like about it, and come up with a plan that is acceptable by most people.
Council has carried out a two-phase engagement approach. Phase 1 was conducted between 23rd March and 19th of April this year, and before the draft streetscape plan was developed. As part of the consultation, Council distributed 9,300. Phase 2 of the engagement process was conducted between 28th of October to 15th of November to obtain feedback on the draft streetscape framework plan. This consultation had the same engagement activities as the first round and recorded a 40% increase in the amount of feedback received.
I think it would be very good to eliminate cars, certainly, from Ackland Street.
What happened with Fitzroy Street will happen with Ackland Street.
I find myself on the side of the traders.
I'm actually quite positive for the change. I feel like it might even bring more foot traffic.
Given so many of us in the community have very strong feelings against it.
I can see the benefits. I don't think it's going to dramatically impact people as much as they think.
Very hard to know who's going to be winners and losers out of something like that.
The decision for the Ackland Street upgrade was delivered on December the 8th, with all councillors in favour of the latest proposal.
This struggle will have to continue. It's just very disappointing what happened tonight.
I'm disappointed. Of course, I was hoping that we'd, come away with a deferment. And it's not just about us. It's about, protecting an icon and improving an icon.
A lot of the Ackland Street traders are very, very concerned, and I think we have to respect that.
It has been a very long road, and we've thought very carefully. We've consulted very widely with our community about what the best solution is for Ackland Street.
I think it's a good progressive move. I think it's a good forward move. It opens up the mall.
Last year, the Minister for Public Transport and Roads stopped the proposal for the tram super stop near Balaclava Railway Station from going ahead. Local businesses needed more time to provide input on the proposed plan, since it was going to have a dramatic impact on their businesses.
In terms of their track record in Fitzroy Street, there's a lot of closed businesses near where these tram stops go in.
This will be a matter of weeks in terms of whole construction time. It's not a matter of months.
Let's go to you, Nick. You're Nick Haynes. You're standing in Lake Ward as an independent.
Indeed, yes.
And you have some views about Fitzroy Street. The thing I keep hearing about Fitzroy Street is that it's moribund, if not dead.
It's waving, drowning, not waving, I think, at the moment. But looking at that, the Fitzroy Street situation, it's a perfect storm of a lot of things. It's the ridiculous upgrade with the higher tram track, which cut off thoroughfares along the street. It's also ridiculous rents, people charging out of control rents, and the elephant in the room, the Gatwick. So it's like the trifecta of tragedy, really. Yeah.
Anyone would like to respond? Is Fitzroy Street as dire as that?
It's pretty dire. I live around the corner from Fitzroy Street. It is pretty dire in terms of the number of businesses that are closed. However, having lived in the area for a very long time, I do recall 30 years ago, Fitzroy Street went through a very similar sort of patch. So I'm hoping that it comes, out the other side again like it did last time. For me, I don't think that the improvements, the beautification scheme, call it whatever you like, are the issue. I think that it's very difficult for businesses to pay those high rents that Nick referred to. It buzzes in summer, but it sure doesn't in winter.
So Jennifer hopes something will happen. Richard, you're standing. What can be done?
Look, I've got to start off by saying I'm an incredibly passionate believer in small business. I think big business should be very tightly regulated, so because they're monopolistic and avarice in their behaviour. But small business, the one area I think small business should be very tightly regulated is how they employ people. So don't get me wrong, they can be pretty dark in that area. So, but I don't think the city, about $3 million is spent by in two areas. One is, not $3 million, about $1.6 million in teams within the council on the vibrant villages and the economic development unit. But I don't think they're being very effective, and I think we need to do a lot more in this city, because the stats are that 75% of the people who are workers leave this city every day to go to another part of Melbourne. Now, that causes enormous congestion, lots of consumption of fuel. It's not good for the environment. So
75% of residents, you mean, leave to work?
Yeah, 75% of the people who work in our residents leave the city every day. I'm really passionate about getting young people back to this city, because this city has become incredibly expensive. They're all over the north side of the river where it's less expensive. And we're not creating the new entrepreneurial businesses here because they're not here. We're getting a more, dare I say, bourgeois people who work in the city, who can afford the high cost of living here, but they're not entrepreneurs. I think we've got to push for the entrepreneurial group to come here. That's what I'm passionate about.
Just described your constituents as bourgeois.
Yeah, look, bourgeois. You know, 2/3 of the city are bourgeois. Let's not be frank about it. But and I'm part of it. I accept all that. But there is a third of the city who are not well off, and we've got to look after them. I'm very passionate about that too.
Andrew, the average house price in Port Phillip is $1.1 million.
Yeah.
You can't get in.
I'm not arguing.
No.
Yeah. And what's the council going to do about
Yeah, I was going to say, what can council do
What
about
can
that?
council do about that?
That comes back to my issue about rates, and I can go on and rattle on. You know, 33% rate increase in 5 years. The council is not helping this high-cost city. It's actually adding to it. So I think.
But Richard, put that aside for a minute.
Yeah.
You talk. The question was about. You know, you raised issues about how we could attract younger people, entrepreneurs, whatever. What can council do in that space?
Look, it is limited. I agree. I do think those two units at the council need to be looked at. I have to admit that I think council officers who are all very well-intentioned, I would actually like to see those two units possibly outsourced to someone. So you appoint them for 2 years to come up with a program and deliver it over 2 to 3 years, and you put KPIs in place, and if they don't, you can dismiss them. But at the moment, you employ officers, and if they don't perform in that area, and it is difficult, I do accept that. It's very difficult for the city to do things. It's more about a climate. So, look,
so if you were outsourcing it, what would they be doing?
They would actually be coming up with programs to promote the business in the city, both to the outside world to come here and to develop programs to get young people here.
We're talking essentially about the rejuvenation at the moment of Fitzroy Street. Catherine,
okay.
Do the Greens, do you have a view on what can be done in that street?
I think first up I'll acknowledge what we saw a little bit in that video, which is that it is actually a really complex issue. And one of the other things that came up as a theme is that the community has a really strong desire to be engaged and consulted as part of these processes of developing these plans. So that's been a theme of the Greens campaign. We've been spending a lot of time going out and speaking with residents, and I've personally walked Fitzroy and Ackland streets to speak with traders and see if I can get a little bit under the surface of some of the views here.
So you've got a solution for us?
Well, I think what I can say is I'm not going to pretend that it's a simple thing to solve, but many of the issues that Richard brought up were raised. High commercial rents were raised, and frequently one of the things that was brought up was people who are experiencing some vulnerable times in their lives, people experiencing homelessness and sleeping rough, or people who might be suffering from addiction. These were other things that were raised when I was walking the street, and I think what we can say is that there are things that we can do to address some of those, I guess, symptoms which are feeding into this problem. Council can provide practical assistance and connect people who are struggling in some way with services to help them get back on their feet. That's one thing that I think, you know, there's a real human dimension of this that I think often we forget.
But would that revive Fitzroy Street?
Well, the other side of the human dimension is that I think we have a really passionate group of traders who strongly believe in the vitality of that street. I believe in the vitality
So what needs to be done next?
Okay. Can I intervene with a few facts? A decade ago, an economic study was commissioned which said that if you don't reinvent and salvage the infrastructure on the foreshore, that the foreshore would go backwards. And that has happened. For years, the Pallow's been shrouded with, pretty ugly scaffolding. You know, we'll never get an answer on the triangle side. I'm sure we're going to come back to that. There's been very little proper growth and maintenance of infrastructure. The place is looking tired, predictable, and, you know, let me be frank, I am one of those few people who support the Ackland Street redevelopment, basically because I'm not a fan of cars. I know people have to come here by car, but I do believe that pedestrianisation is a great thing.
Are you suggesting that's what should happen in Fitzroy Street?
I'm not suggesting that at all, but I am suggesting that we have to have a look at the whole integrated foreshore, which we did 10 years ago. We had 18 projects and famously 17 got done and one didn't. And, you know, I'm not saying anything other than we have had councils that have failed to grasp the infrastructure challenge both on the foreshore and throughout the city. We've got this lazy balance sheet, we've got high rates, and the consequence of that ineptitude is that we are suffering, particularly in Fitzroy Street.
Can I jump in? Nick, are you hearing what you want to hear from a Fitzroy Street trader perspective?
Well, yes.
That there's enough going to be happening by these people who want to stand for council?
Well, there's no silver bullet, is there, when it comes to Fitzroy Street, I don't think. But there's little things that can be done. The rent issue, I don't know what the solution is there.
That's difficult.
That's difficult. It's a government issue as far as I know. I mean,
it's a market issue too.
You can double the rent of a shop in a year, but you can't do that with the residents. Oh God, yeah. The 2 car lanes is insane because you got more bike lanes than you got car lanes on Fitzroy Street now. And once the car's on Fitzroy Street, they can't turn around if they see something. They've got to go all the way down, all the way back, which is crazy. I don't know who came up with that one. That was a ripper.
But even for people who aren't in cars, for the immediate local neighbourhood, there is no reason to go to Fitzroy Street.
I live one street behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Can I say one thing about the Gatwick though? The Gatwick's been there
for a long time.
In good times and in bad. So the Gatwick's been stable and it's been cyclical.
Yeah.
Fitzroy Street's been cyclical.
There's this magical thing now called ice, and the Gatwick has soured.
Yeah, that's true.
I worked for a methadone doctor across the road from the Gatwick for 5 years. We had nothing like the trouble we've got now.
Right, that's fair.
And I'm sorry,
that's a fair point.
And look, I absolutely feel for these people, but ice has changed the game completely.
And it's changing the game.
When you've got women being bashed in the face because they won't give someone 50 cents at 8 o'clock in the morning, the game's changed.
Yeah, and the game's changed also in Carlisle Street. So if you go to Carlisle Street, now Carlisle Street is vibrant and it's working.
And it's local.
And it's local, and it hasn't been touched by council in 10 years, and it needs.
Probably a good thing.
It does.
No, it needs new monies.
It could do with a little bit of a.
It needs love, but
it does need a complete revamp.
No.
Yeah,
So the 2 revamps have been Ackland Street and Fitzroy Street have been highly controversial. I think Fitzroy Street's been a muck-up and hasn't really contributed to the infrastructure renewal, and Ackland Street is still controversial because it hasn't been finished, but I suspect it could be a winner.
I've actually got a good feeling about it, to be honest. I'm actually on your side there.
And Carlisle Street just needs a little bit of love, but we've got a safety issue there with ice.
But my big concern about Carlisle Street, again, it is extraordinary. You can still buy fruit and vegetables and proteins all up the street. There's no other street left in the city like that. So if you put
Elwood, sorry.
Well, Bay Street,
Ormond
not
Road.
really. There's no butcher shops there's one fruit shop in Bay. Clarendon's got none. So, but what if you put super tram stops in Carlisle Street? I just terrified what that'll do to that city.
The best fruit and veggie shop in Carlisle Street has just gone. They've just lost the fish shop.
Really?
So
they've lost the fish shop, yeah.
Oggy, can I bring you in on this? Oggy Simic, you're a Green candidate for Gateway Ward. super tram stops in Carlisle Street, surely that would be part of the green agenda, part of the green platform you'd be all in favour of, wouldn't you?
Well, we do have a state MP for Southern Metro region, Sue Pennicue, who has spoken in favour of the tram stop because it enhances opportunities for people with disabilities to access public transport. Public transport infrastructure needs an overhaul, I think, throughout Port Phillip. There's more to be done in order to make it easier for people to... I've been out door knocking quite a lot as well as part of the campaign. One of the things that keeps coming up is that people are also really worried about parking, for example. They're worried about their streets being incredibly busy. I think it's important for us to start moving our culture away from using cars and being so dependent on cars. And one of the ways that we do that is by improving public transport infrastructure.
Okay, let's talk public transport infrastructure.
Just before we do, can I just... I haven't heard from anybody what council will do. I've heard lots of problems in our shopping centres, but I haven't heard... and lots of consultation, but I haven't heard anybody say what they're going to do. I was mayor in St Kilda when we did the Ackland Street redevelopment and the paving, which has now all been ripped up, and when we worked very closely with Don Levy-Fitzpatrick to get the George working. And that was 100% devotion of effort of council actually being interventionist, of offering rate holidays, of dispensation of parking, of actually trying to get entrepreneurs with flair in there working hard. That happened.
Would that blueprint work?
When Jen says Fitzroy Street was a different beast 30 years ago, it certainly was.
So, John, would that blueprint work in Fitzroy Street now?
Well, I think when you look at other centres of cities that have undergone some sort of crisis like Newcastle has, it's been very strong local government intervention, either in terms of directly working with the landlords or actually taking out rents and subsidising new businesses coming in. And that's what needs to happen in Fitzroy Street. It's not going to change without a very strong council role.
I agree with John.
But I would say that, I'm sorry, but I did talk about infrastructure. And the other thing I would say
is... It's not just infrastructure, Dick. When an engineering solution can only take things so far.
Yeah, but the issue about Fitzroy Street was that the changes were bad. They didn't work. I'm a bike rider. I would never use those bike paths because they're perilous and scary. I won't go into why, but it's failed every stakeholder. And I say to people about Ackland Street, in the end, it's only concrete. It can be ripped up. And we may have to do that in Fitzroy Street. And I actually expect we won't have to do that in Ackland Street. The other thing I would say to expiate the current council is that these are all cyclical. But it is true that there's been a huge cultural shift away. I mean, you only have to look at popular culture. It's now almost always filmed in Fitzroy and north of the Yarra. And it's never filmed, as it used to be, in St Kilda.
John,
artists can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah. That's right. That comes back to that. But John, I would certainly, my view is we should thoroughly assess when we get in those two units. I don't think they're working, and so I would like us to consider possible outsourcing of those two units because I just think it requires a business dynamic sort of culture within those units, and I'm not sure you can get it in a council. I might be wrong, and I'm happy to consider that, but I think we need really good, innovative ideas to attract new businesses to the city and try to attract young people.
Do we know whether this is working in Ackland Street, whether the changes that have happened in that street...
Too early.
And what needs to happen next?
People are optimistic now that the works are underway. The general feel on Ackland Street, I would say, has shifted to optimism, and let's hope that there's a really great community space there that can be utilised and can be a draw card for people to come to that end of the street. I'm hopeful, and I think most people on the street are now, from my experience speaking to them.
One business type thing in my patch of town is I'm nervous about South Melbourne Market. I really think it's being pushed up market too quickly. Markets have got to evolve. I know that there's a new, I use that word bourgeois again, have arrived, and
You're such a Marxist.
I think the market's moving towards servicing them, and it's an asset owned by everyone and must serve everybody. They're starting to kick people out who are servicing a market that isn't young, and wealthy. So that's one thing, and you've got to keep the tradition. If you don't keep the tradition of the market, my studies show that if markets that have tried to go to the tourist market, for example, the tourists are fickle. They come to your city for a couple of years and then they say, I'm going to another city now. And then the market's been turned into this tourist market and they say, well, we'd like you locals to come back. And they say, sorry, you turned it into a tourist market. So we've got to be really careful with self-development markets. It's having its 150th year next year. And I just want to keep it for everybody in this
Jennifer,
city.
you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do want to jump in because I absolutely can't agree with Richard there. My family, we shop at the South Melbourne market every week and we have, going back 40 years. I think what this council has done, the last few councils have done to improve the South Melbourne market is to be applauded. And I think that if you do have an underperforming business that's using a public asset, then it's fair enough from a business perspective to look at if you need to shake up the mix a little bit. The mix of people at the market, I think, is still very strong, the social mix.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just seeing a move.
I just saw some. I just saw some stats out today about the increase in shoppers at the market has absolutely gone up. The revenue, it is a jewel in Port Phillip's crown and it's to be treasured and nurtured, and I think that's what council has done, but it also has to pay its way. It can't be at the cost, to the community.
It's not.
And it's ticking, it's kicking goals in terms of the increasing shoppers. Parking's becoming a nightmare, but it's also increasing its revenue back to the city, and I think it's fantastic.